what are some common mistakes, some common traps you see people fall into when it comes to estate planning?
Oh man, there's a ton of them actually. Hard to pinpoint just one, but you know, I can think offhand just some examples of what we've seen recently with client appointments and folks calling in off the show. One that comes to mind is a lot of times people will, in a sense, if they're in control of their own money and they're trying to manage their own money, that's to say they have multiple accounts all around. We see this all the time, like orphaned 401ks, or they set up an IRA here or an IRA there. They got a Roth over here, and then they maybe switch jobs and they got a couple 401ks out there, and it just looks like a big like junk drawer, a big mess of stuff everywhere. And perhaps maybe your beneficiaries or where you want your money to go has changed, and you haven't caught up to that. You haven't made those changes, and so that's one thing is we're going to help you consolidate, organize, and then make sure your beneficiaries are properly designated, but then also make sure it aligns. It just makes sense for it to align with your will and your trust. And what's important here is I don't even like to talk about the word will, because wills are just basically worthless. They're obsolete. And people are going to out there listening right now and be thinking, what does he mean by that? A will, what we're talking about today is a solid estate plan is trying to avoid probate, right? Avoid challenges, avoid your estate being put out into the public, avoid the courts getting involved, and avoiding the state getting involved. And so having that proper solid estate plan from A to Z, and also making sure the beneficiaries on your accounts line up with that, is so important. I'm thinking of a lady had come in not too long ago, and unfortunately her husband was 78. He was really in good shape, and he liked to kind of manage his own money. He had accounts all over the place, at Fidelity, Charles Schwab, Edward Jones, like just was kind of one of those guys, and he liked to kind of trade his own stocks. And she told us she was coming just crying because she didn't know what to do and she needed help. And unfortunately, this guy, he just got mad one night, or he got, I don't know, whatever happened. For whatever reason, he decided to switch accounts, and he moved from like Schwab over to Fidelity. Sure. And, these days, fortunately, unfortunately, I mean, they've made it pretty easy with being in the computer and online world and the AI world and all this kind of stuff. Like you literally could open up an account and move millions of dollars or money from one custodian or company to the other, like that, right? So this guy was, I don't know,
in Starbucks if you're sitting at trying to get a coffee.
yeah, literally, like the apps now, it's like crazy. Like the younger generations will set up $1 million account, never meet anybody, and put on an app or whatever, and they're moving money around. So but this guy had done something like that, and he was kind of, it was like a kind of a last minute whimsical decision. He moved his money, he moved $500,000 over to another custodian. And when he did that, everything was set up online, good to go, and he started trading again. But he never got to the point where he actually went in there and listed the beneficiaries on there, and didn't put his wife on as the beneficiary. Well, imagine this. She's 72, he's 78. They've been married for 50 years. And this poor lady still has not been able to recover or get that $500,000, which was it's her money, right? You would think, this is a spouse, so it would just easily transfer to her. No, because what was in the will, basically, and we would have caught this if somebody came in for review. He had mentioned in the will that he had a long lost son in like California, and that he literally put in the will, I'm leaving him nothing. I'm leaving him 4 books on financial planning or something like that. It was kind of like an in-your-face type thing. Like, I'm not happy with your financial responsibility or acumen. I'm not leaving you anything. Well, just by him mentioning that person, his son, in the will, whether you're getting something or not, guess what? That person has to be read the will. That person has to be located. Now, we're in Florida. This long-lost son who hasn't seen in 30 years or something is in California. Mm-hmm. So this person has to be located. Now this account's tied up in a probate before they can even think about disseminating assets. So probably based on that one quick kind of irresponsible move, in a sense, and things not aligning with their will and their trust, Now there's $500,000 stuck in probate, and I don't know how long it'll be there. It's probably be in the courts for years and years and years. And more than likely, based on the laws and stuff, she's going to lose half of that portfolio. So just tragic stuff. So these are the things that we want to, nip in the bud, and these are the things that we want to get out in front of. Because and we see it almost every day, things like this when people come in. So not a scare tactic by any means, but let's get things organized and let's get things figured out and make sure everything properly aligns. And by the way, if you're listening and you own a piece of property, a lot of people think like, do I need a will or do I need a trust? Like that's the biggest question, right? Well, guess what? If you own a piece of property, I don't care if you don't have, people think like, oh, only the wealthy need a trust. No, it's not that at all. A trust is going to help you avoid probate. That's the key. And so like, even if you just own a piece of property, you need to have a trust because that property is a probatable asset. Your IRAs, 401ks, annuities are non-probatable asset. Okay. But they still have to have the proper beneficiary designations on there. But anything pretty much is what we call a probatable asset. And this is kind of the number one mistake that people make. I can save people thousands and thousands of dollars on taxes just by coming in to see us if you don't have your property inside of a trust, because a lot of people might just have a ladybird deed, or you've already put your kids or somebody on the deed. That's a big no-no, and it's going to create a big tax situation. So not to give too much away or to confuse people, but just one of the examples as to why you really need to get in here and see us and get an appointment today.
Question for you: what are contingent beneficiaries? I think that's
great.
That's maybe something that's thrown around a lot, Eric, and I think people get very confused by that. So what are contingent beneficiaries, and how does it relate to probate and non-probate assets, as you were just speaking about?
Yeah, great question. And, super important to have that reviewed for sure. So, and I'm glad you brought it because we see this all the time is we'll see most people will bring in their accounts. We'll do an account review and they'll just have one set of beneficiaries, or what we call the primary beneficiary. So let's just say, in all marriages, pretty much we know that your spouse is your primary beneficiary. Well, what if you don't have a spouse, or even if you do have a spouse, who's next in line? So what if, and this is what we see a lot of times with outdated documents. Like you might have put your spouse on there, or a brother or sister or some family member that maybe you no longer want to leave money to, or maybe they're already deceased, maybe they're not around. So if you're leaving money to somebody who's deceased, guess what? That's going to go into their estate and it's going to be hung up in probate. And so, because now they got to find who is the lineal beneficiary of that person's estate. So a contingent beneficiary is super important. So, just as an example, like obviously like my wife is going to be my primary beneficiary. If something happens to my wife or my wife isn't around, then I've got, my kids listed and their percentages underneath there as the contingents. And really important because God forbid, but like, what if, okay, I leave my children, I have 4 kids, I leave them 25% each. Well, what if one of my children predeceases everybody? Well, you've got to make sure you've designated how that person's share in the contingent beneficiary paperwork is now going to receive their share. Is their share going to go into their estate and go to their lineal descendants, or does it get thrown back in the pot for the other 3 kids? Like so many unanswered questions that we have to iron out. But I love the fact that you brought that up, because that's just so important, is to making sure we have that second tier and sometimes even a third tier of where our assets are going to go in the event of folks, predeceasing, or, hey, let's face it, we see this all the time. Like maybe little Johnny didn't come visit you when they were in town and grandma's mad and she wants him out. It's like, well, we got to get in there. We got to make those changes. So it makes sense to just reviewing your estate plan on an annual basis might seem like overkill, but it's really not.